Now what I'd like to do here is I'd like to show how it's going to work with us by answering a few frequently asked questions. Now you can imagine over 20 years or so I've been asked all kinds of questions, because when I start a course normally with people, I ask them what they want from the day. I ask them, is there anything specific that they'd like to deal with? Is there anything they want to ask me before we start? And I'll give you some examples of the kind of things that I get asked. Can you stop me going red, please? Yes. Could you stop me forgetting my lines? Yes. Could you stop me going blank? Yes. Could you help me be more engaging with the audience? Yes. Could you help me gain more confidence? Yes. Could you stop me crying? Yes. All kinds of questions. Now, we will deal with all of these in due course, but there's one question I'd like to focus on. Well, there's three things I'd like to focus on. The first one is very important. This is the goal, because people say to me, what's the goal? Is there what's the purpose of this? What am I trying to achieve here? Because there's no degree in personal impact. There's no qualification here. I know I want to get better, but is there something I should be trying to achieve? Yes, there is. What I want you to achieve, or what I want you to get as close as you can to, is what I would perceive to be the ideal performing state. Now, the ideal performing state is that when you are in front of others, you should not be thinking of yourself. Because if you are thinking of yourself, you are therefore conscious of yourself, you are therefore self-conscious. And if you are at all self-conscious in any way whatsoever, it will be detected by your audience. Not necessarily consciously, but definitely subconsciously. So we need to make sure that if we stop thinking about ourselves, all of these issues will be taken care of. Now that's very easy for me to say, don't think about yourself, but you've got to think about something. So what I want you to do, instead of thinking about yourself, I want you to start to think about your material, your message, your speech, or your presentation, and your audience. So we start to think about the material, and we start to think about the audience. And the more we think forward onto those, the less we think about ourselves. We will go into this in more detail in the course itself. We've got a section about this. But that's the principle, the idea. And now this is quite difficult to achieve. It'll take a time, but I'm going to give you some building blocks that we'll talk about in this next section. Now, another question I'm asked is, people say to me, I don't know what to do with my hands. What do I do with my hands? Now, before I answer that question, let me ask you a question. Have you ever, in your whole life, ever woken up in the morning and said to yourself, right, what shall I do with my hands today? Ever said that? No, because you never think about it. Your hands are a way to express yourself. You use them to express yourself. Some people use them more than others. Other countries and nationalities use them very differently. But as long as it's the way you normally express yourself, then it's very natural and it's very real. But once you become self-conscious, suddenly you don't know what you do with your hands, because you don't even think about it. And you're saying, what do I do? What do I do with these hands? So the idea is to stop thinking about yourself, and your hands will behave as they normally behave. And it will look very natural, look very real. Now, until you start to develop the ideal performing state, let me give you a few do's and don'ts about what to do with your hands. Now this, the hands down here, this is a picture that you will see a lot when people give presentations. You'll also see this at a football match when there's a free kick. There's a free kick over there, the goal is back here, and the defenders line up in a wall to protect the goal. Now they're protecting the goal, but the ball's going to be hit towards them, so they're also going to protect themselves. They don't do this. They do this, because obviously this is where they feel most vulnerable. So if I see this picture, I know that you are experiencing a certain vulnerability. So whenever we can, let's avoid that picture. This picture with the hands by the sides, this is not a good look. This also doesn't look comfortable. It's not easy to pull this off. It looks a bit like the gunslinger, so we need to avoid that one too. Hands behind the back is also not helpful. Some people say this is a very good example of open body language stance, and in some circumstances it is. But when we're speaking in front of others, what happens if you hide your hands is that's what your audience will think. Not necessarily consciously, but definitely subconsciously. Why is he hiding his hands? Why is he not using his hands? Because we know people use their hands to express themselves. So if you have them behind your back, it looks as though you're hiding them. It's the same as with hands in pockets. Now, chaps do this a lot. Maybe one hand, and they use one hand like that, thinking that it looks casual and easy and relaxed. And in fact, it doesn't. Again, it's the same thing. Why are they hiding their hands? Why are they not using their hands? We will read that subconsciously. So those are things to be avoided. Now, as I say, chaps normally put their hands in their pockets. Girls do this and then they cross their legs. Now that's showing a very high level of vulnerability here. So those are all things to be avoided. So if those are the things to be avoided, what should we do? Now we use our hands in this territory here, this area here. So what we want to find is the ability to just let our hands fall and relax. Now we can be in a position like this, not like this because we could see white knuckles, just like this. Careful about pushing it forward too much. It looks a bit like you're begging. Keep them close to the body. Find a way in which you can be relaxed here. You could hold 2 fingernails. You could hold 1 fingernail. It's just that what happens is that when you stop using your hands, they fall into a place here that's relaxed. So what I want you to do, I want you to practice that you can stand still with your hands in this position and feel comfortable. Initially, you might not feel comfortable because you're not used to doing this. But if you can try and make that happen, so that's what your hands will always do. And the hands will always look nice and relaxed. There's no pressure here. There's no tension here. That's what we'll do. Now, the final question I'd like to deal with before we move on is people say to me, how do I learn when I've got my presentation together? Should I wing it or do I write it out word for word and learn it like that? So we've got 2 extremes here. Well, I would suggest that neither of those are particularly helpful. We're going to find a middle way. Because let's talk about these 2. Because people say, I know my subject very well, should I wing it? Well, if you wing it, it will never, let me repeat that, it will never be as effective as if you do some preparation. And I'll tell you why. Because if you wing it, it means that you're thinking on your feet. You know your subject, but you haven't really done a lot of preparation. You haven't structured it. So what happens is, as you're talking, what you're thinking of, I'm saying this and I'm thinking of what I'm going to say next. I'm also thinking of something I'm going to say in the future, and I'm also worried that I might have missed something out here. So what happens is you've got lots of thoughts in your head at the same time. And this is what we call in the theatre a divided focus. And if you have a divided focus, it means that your message doesn't come across as clearly and as effectively as it should. It won't be received by your audience as clearly and as effectively as it should. Now, all the time in the theatre, we're very concerned with making sure we have a very clear thought. And often I say to an actor, what are you thinking on that line? He says, it's the only line, I don't know what I'm thinking of. But we need to then talk with the actor and the director to make sure that we're clear about what's being said, because the thought has to be clear. So what we do is that we try and create a thought journey so that we're always clear what our thinking is. So ideally, it's best not to wing it. If you write it down word for word, if you're not used to that, you could forget one word and then you forget where you are. Now, actors learn lines. That's the part of the actor's job. I mean, you have to be able to learn lines or don't be an actor. As the late, great Noel Coward said, the job of a professional actor is to learn the lines and don't bump into the furniture. That's it. That's the job. So actors can learn lines. But they don't just learn lines, because the lines are tied up with the choreography, the movement. It's called blocking in the theatre. People are moving, you're moving here, you're moving there, you're sitting here, you're standing there, and you say something when you're doing it. And that ties up with the way that you learn the lines. But the main thing is that actors learn lines but create thoughts. That's the actor's skill. They create for themselves a thought journey, and it's the thought journey that will sustain them through the performance. When I talked earlier about making sure that this thought is very clear, that's exactly what actors will do. And that's what I'd like you to do. Now, we'll talk about the way that you structure your piece, the way that you learn. You'll learn by having your thoughts, so that when you're waiting to start and you're very nervous, you think, what if I forget my lines? You won't forget your lines, you've got your thoughts. What if I forget my thoughts? You won't forget your thoughts, because maybe that's what you've got written down in your notes, or maybe that's what you've got on a slide behind you. But it's this middle line, this thought journey, that's going to see you through. So I would say, don't wing it, don't write it down word for word, have a thought journey. Now, those are just a few questions, frequently asked questions that I deal with, just so that you know how it's going to work between us. And a lot of these things we will deal with as the course goes through. So those are the introductory videos to the course, explaining the value of the course and how I would be able to help you.